Our State of the U.S. segment tonight, former CIA Colonel Tony Shaffer said that it is likely that President Trump was spied on by the Obama administration and that the scandal is worse than Watergate. Shaffer said that while Trump Tower was not physically wiretapped, as President Trump suggested, the basic fundamental idea and claim is true. And if recent reports are to be believed, a smoking gun that would implicate the Obama administration in the surveillance of Trump is set to be released soon. With me now to break it down from the Washington Free Beacon, Adam Kredo. Adam, good to see you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Adam, Colonel Shaffer is not the only one to use the term Watergate here. I mean, if what we're hearing does actually materialize, if this smoking gun that James Rosen says that he has, this source who's going to reveal the truth about this, if it actually comes to fruition, this would be far bigger than Watergate.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. It's potentially a major bombshell, and as far as I'm concerned, if it plays out the way we expect it to, I've also spoken to sources about this. You might even see potential prison time for some of these Obama administration officials complicit in this. I'm not sure at this point just how much authorization there was and who knew exactly what was taking place. As far as I can tell from sources I've spoken to, at least a portion of that senior NSC staff in the Obama White House was aware of what was taking place, and from its last weeks in the administration to the time it left was leaking information about this, trying to, as we should say, trump up allegations against Trump himself, and that's very damaging, I think.
Right, and this is where it gets a little tricky. This is where it gets a little tricky because there's a fine line between leaking the classified information, which is a crime, and what President Obama allegedly did, which is lower the classification level for these masked names so that more people had legitimate access to it. Because I want to speak to one thing that you said, and that's whether or not this surveillance in and of itself was legitimate. Congressman Nunes said that it was legitimate, but the issue here, and like I said, this is where it gets shady, I guess the word is, that they were using foreign targets, legitimate foreign targets for surveillance, but unmasking the names of the people the foreign targets were talking to, the Trump officials, so that they could access those names.
Precisely. I think that's what's at issue here. As far as I can tell, the surveillance itself may have been justified in its look. It's honestly very easy to justify this type of secret surveillance. You don't have to go very far in terms of burden of proof if you're just trying to, first examine a situation. What I think is the major problem here is the way that the intelligence was politicized and used as ammunition to try to take down Trump and his inner circle, whether that's Michael Flynn and the leaks against him or the other leaks we see. What's very fascinating about Nunes, and he disclosed this in an interview just earlier today, and I expect to hear more from him on it. What he said is that that night he met this so-called source, he actually had to go to what we know as a SCIF. This is a secure area that has classified intelligence. There's one on Capitol Hill. There's also one at the White House. He had to go to an executive branch SCIF in order to view these documents that have led him to conclude that there was an element of surveillance and that it was done in a nefarious manner.
Right, and what does that tell us, the exact location that he had to go to, besides it just being a place to view classified information, the fact that it was on White House grounds? I mean, does that lead back to what you were saying before, that someone from the Obama White House is the source?
It says to me that it certainly didn't emanate or touch Capitol Hill. These areas, these so-called SCIFs, are kept apart from each other, and they're not on networks or anything like this. So, sure, Congress has their own and views documents pertinent to things that they would review, but the fact that this was particularly an executive branch SCIF, and there's not just one at the White House, there's several of them, but the fact that he had to go to one pertaining to the executive branch, I think, is very revealing, and he kind of opened up about this in the interview earlier today with Bloomberg News.
Right, which is interesting because he said just on Friday during his press conference that he wasn't going to be revealing sources or any information about the sources to protect the privacy of that person, so that that wasn't compromised, and potentially, I suppose, so that the Democratic members of the Intelligence Committee don't try to talk to the superior of the source in the intelligence community for retaliation. It's honestly, Adam, it's so messed up. It's so politicized in there. I don't know how we're going to find out the actual truth. But here are my questions, I guess, that I need to have answered before I can untangle any of this. And that is, what other plausible purpose would there have been for unmasking these names? The only reason, to my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you would unmask names is if it's necessary for the national security of our nation. And this should have been told to Congress if that were true.
Yeah, you're right. Look, there are numerous reasons. It's hard to know without the full story and the fact that a lot of this is classified. There are numerous reasons one might do this, but the fact that this led to names and information being placed in newspapers in what, as far as I'm concerned, is a very targeted and coordinated manner by, at that time, current Obama administration officials and now former, says to me that it was done for a very clear, nefarious purpose, and that was to build a case against Trump to create this impression of so-called Manchurian candidate and all the news stories that we saw and continue to see. And I can tell you from sources I've spoken to, a lot of these people are very scared right now because they think the hammer is going to come down and what they've been up to is really going to be exposed. Right.
Well, if it's wrongdoing, then they have reason to be nervous. Adam, we're almost out of time. I do want to ask one other question here. In these intelligence reports that Congressman Nunes has been talking about, the ones that Congressman Schiff was annoyed that he wasn't told about before the White House was briefed on them. Why weren't these intelligence reports the first thing that was investigated when they were talking about investigating Russia, when they were looking into either the legitimacy or not, the illegitimacy of President Trump's claims of wiretapping? Why were these only looked at now? Shouldn't this have been the first thing that they examined?
Yeah, it's unclear why this is just coming up. I think that the Trump administration for some time is trying, now that they're in the White House, discern where exactly this came from. But in the case of Nunes, I very much think it was a whistleblower that was fed up with what they had seen and decided that it was in the public interest to come forward and set the record straight and help people like Nunes and those in the Trump administration figure out exactly what was taking place with this campaign. And I think that's a very brave person to do that.
Right, it certainly is, especially if it's true that the intelligence community has been politicized or weaponized to the point. If that all transpires, if we get evidence that that is what happened, it's incredibly brave. I hope we do find out. Adam, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for breaking this down. Talk to you soon.